Of all the foes Godzilla has faced, none have been as iconic and endearing as King Ghidorah. This three-headed monstrosity has been a thorn in the Big G's side for over 60 years, and has gone through numerous incarnations over that span. As such, I saw it befitting that I should rank all of his designs from worst to best to determine which version of the three-headed monster is the most radical-dadical. Like with my previous design rankings, I'm not going to be covering his comic book designs or his appearances in stuff like Chibi Godzilla or Godziban. However, I will be ranking Ghidorah adjacent monsters like Ghidorah in Monster X because they're close enough to Ghidorah in my book. Also, like always, this list is my opinion and entirely subjective. You'll probably disagree with it, and that's fine. Just don't be a jerk in the comments below unless you want a three-headed dragon attacking your city. But before we get into the actual list, I wanted to go over a couple iterations that didn't show up in official Godzilla movies, but still found interesting nonetheless. In the 1985 Tim Burton film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, there's a brief scene taking place in a movie studio where Godzilla and King Ghidorah are duking it out until Pee-wee Herman rides in and wrecks the place. Both of the kaiju suits are clearly made on the lower side of the quality spectrum, but it's cool seeing them both regardless. Ghidorah also made a cameo in the 90s TV show Hysteria on an episode about ancient Rome, where he's seen rampaging through the ancient city, firing red gravity beams at the architecture. The design is decent, although he's colored a diluted green rather than his typical golden glamour, though funny enough, despite being Ghidorah, he uses Godzilla's roars during the clip. Talk about cursed. But with those two oddities out of the way, let's rank these dastardly dragons. Starting off the list proper, we have an incredibly obscure depiction of the character that has only appeared as part of the Godzilla vs. Evangelion The Real 4D, attraction that was at Universal Studios Japan back in 2019. The ride sees Shin Godzilla fighting off against Evangelion robots, and I don't know a goddamn thing about Evangelion, so I'm not even going to try to explain it. After making canon fodder of some mechs, it's soon revealed that the reason Godzilla was rampaging in the first place was because he sensed Ghidorah was coming to cause some more trouble, and dear god, what the hell is this design? Listen, the grotesque look works for Shin Godzilla, but this weird layered ridge texture all across Shin Ghidorah's body looks plain hideous, and I feel uncomfortable just looking at it. It just looks like somebody barfed an ugly looking texture over normal Ghidorah instead of being finely crafted to look harrowing like Shin Godzilla. Why do the wings also have ridges? Shouldn't they be thin web membranes designed for flight? Despite that, there are some elements I can appreciate, such as the grasping claws at the end of his tails. Frankly, I prefer this tail shape to the usual spiked clubs of all his other incarnations. The vibrant red gravity beams he can fire are a nice shakeup from the traditional yellow coloration, although the Hysteria design did it first, and overall, I'm thankful Godzilla and the Evangelion robots teamed up to put a stop to this hideous abomination. It's no secret I have bias towards the Millennium Era when it comes to these rankings, but even that isn't enough to make me vibe with this bizarre incarnation of the Space Dragon. Final Wars is pretty hit or miss with their monster redesigns overall. For every we also have whatever the hell they did to my boy Megaguirus. Like his Showa incarnation, this version of Monster Zero is aligned with the Zillions, and is the most powerful kaiju in their arsenal, proving to be the only monster who offers a worthy fight to the king of the monsters. Monster X is very humanoid in appearance and looks like a skeleton sent straight up from hell. If I didn't know this monster was from Godzilla, I'd assume it was something from Doom. The only characteristic that resembles Ghidorah is its 3 heads, but even then, it only has 1 full head and the other 2 are only halves of one. But at least he still has the ability to fire gravity beams, albeit from his eyes instead of his mouth. With his bipedal stance and oversized top half, he looks more like a Power Rangers villain than anything else, and I can't say I like the look that much. Also, this is easily the worst tail a Ghidorah-like design has ever sported, being nothing more than a long black tube that splits off at the end. Thankfully, Monster X happens to transform into something significantly cooler deep into his duel with Godzilla, and we'll be seeing that one much later on the list. I will say though, Monster X knows how to make a badass entrance. Gives me chills every time. Whoo boy, I'm about to get flamed for this placement. In my defense, I don't hate this design, and I think he still looks pretty cool, just not as metal as literally every other one on this list. This original suit for the three-headed dragon also has the distinction of being the most used Ghidorah design in the entire series, being featured in 4 separate films across the Showa era, and making a handful of appearances in the Zone Fighter TV show. He also cameoed in a few episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog, which is amazing. For a first design, it's alright, acting as a good baseline for future looks to build off from. The golden skin and towering frame give him a sense of domineering royalty that wordlessly shows him to be a step above the other kaiju that Godzilla has faced off against previously. Oh, and his entrances with the whole fiery silhouette thing, pure art. Unfortunately, a lot of that initial grace is lost when the heads are having a seizure at all times. Obviously, the constant movement of the heads is a core part of the monster, but it's a little too overbearing in this initial incarnation. His heads are also a little goofy looking and don't really succeed in making you fear the supposed destroyer of worlds. But the actual reason why this guy is so low is due to the manes of hair he possesses on each of his heads. I'm not a fan and never will be. I know dragons in Asian culture often possess manes of hair, but I'm a Westerner who prefers Western dragons with nothing but scales. Besides, the hair doesn't even look that good on Monster Zero, and I'm thankful this aspect of his design has never returned. I know, shocking right? Me putting another Millennium Era design this low on a ranking? But GMK Ghidorah just ain't got the sauce. Part of this may be because he's dwarfed in size by this film's Godzilla, which is intentional as this Ghidorah is unique in the fact that he's actually the hero of the story rather than the villain. He was one of the 3 guardian monsters destined to save Japan from an otherwise insurmountable threat, along with Mothra and Baragon. This Ghidorah originally had 8 heads, but didn't have time to regenerate the other 5 by the time he was woken up. Hell, this Ghidorah wasn't even able to fly right off the bat, nor had the ability to use his gravity beams, instead having to rely on his far less effective Thunder Spark Bite. He earns back the title of King after absorbing the energy of the dying Mothra, and regains his wings and gravity beams, but his design is still lacking. Obviously, he wasn't created to look intimidating, but his head has this constant wide-eyed expression of an old guy who has 0 spatial awareness. I like the texture of his skin though, being a nice upgrade from his Showa design, and his body color is a gorgeous shade of gold that no other Ghidorah design can quite measure up to. Weirdly enough, this suit was recently used just last year in Fest Godzilla 4 Operation Jet Jaguar, an official Godzilla short film that sees Ghidorah crashing in on a fight between a new and improved Jet Jaguar and Final Wars Godzilla. Unfortunately, it's no longer up on the official Godzilla channel anymore. Toho's pulling a Nintendo out here. Not only that, but GMK Ghidorah showed up in a commercial for the Marubeni Corporation, where he drops in on an ongoing fight between an army of samurai and a horde of zombies, but the 3 factions quickly team up to fight off an incoming meteor. GMK Ghidorah has some awesome elements, but the steep competition he's up against renders these points mute. Out of the 3 main monsters featured in the anime trilogy, I'd say Ghidorah has the strongest design on account of me not hating it for once. This time around, Ghidorah is a dimension-surfing god of destruction that doesn't just destroy planets, but literally devours them. I also gotta say it's nice to see a Ghidorah that lives up to the horror stories that were used to originally describe the character back in his debut film. Instead of being mind-controlled by some random alien faction like in nearly every Showa-era movie, this dragon flips the script and instills its influence in the minds of the Exif. These aliens are slaves to his will, acting as gateways for him to access the mortal plane so he can feast on the worlds of the living. Void Ghidorah is basically an H.P. Lovecraft eldritch being, making him the largest incarnation of the character by a country mile, since in the film, you never even see more than its massively elongated necks that surf around through portals that can open up. You have to look at the CG model outside of the movie to see what this guy really looks like, and it's certainly imposing to say the least. But I'll mostly focus on the neck since that's what you see during his screen time in Godzilla the Planet Eater. Right off the bat, I love the spikes sticking out from his neck, and the golden glow illuminating his entire form is both beautiful yet haunting as its light signifies the end of life for an entire planet. His heads lack any semblance of a tongue, and his teeth are essentially just spikes poking out from his mouths. He also trades out a pair of traditional eyes for dozens of smaller beady ones, which succeed in making him feel more alien. It's a great design overall, but totally wasted in the film itself, as all he does is blow up one spaceship and then bite Godzilla a few times before dying rather pathetically when his disciple Metphes is defeated, disabling Ghidorah's ability of intangibility, and he doesn't even have gravity beams, which is a major letdown. Appearing in the 1991 film Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, this version of Ghidorah is a cyborg and was created by the Futurans out of the remains of Heisei King Ghidorah, who was curb-stomped by Godzilla earlier in the film. One would assume a cyborg version of the three-headed dragon would only amplify his cool factor, but in this case, I'd say I prefer his organic form. Nevertheless, Mecha-King Ghidorah is still awesome, but some of the mechanical parts look a little goofy. Out of everything, his wings definitely look the best, being composed of a metal skeleton with golden metal plates. His middle head also got blown off by Godzilla, and it had to be replaced by a metal one that almost looks imposing. Unfortunately, his bright, oversized green eyes give it a thoughtless expression, and the lack of large metallic horns decorating the head diminishes its presence. The new metallic chest would be epic if it didn't dwarf its legs, and that also goes for the ankle gauntlets. It looks less like Ghidorah is outfitted with cybernetic enhancement and more like he's just wearing armor, compared to the Cyber Godzilla where you can literally see the machinery digging into his decayed skin. I should also mention a fully mechanized version of this design existed in toy form as Hyper Mecha-King Ghidorah in the Godzilla Island TV show. Honestly though, I'm still not jazzed about the look even with everything being form-fitting. The Heisei era really just can't get the heads of its mechs to look intimidating. And even though I spent the last 2 minutes talking shit about this design, it's still good, but the normal Heisei Ghidorah was better, and the changes made to the mech took away more than they added. As far as cyborg space dragons go, Ridley did it better. This relative of the king was the main villain in the 1996 film Rebirth of Mothra, and is basically another version of King Ghidorah, so I'm including him on this list because it's not as much of an asspull as Space Godzilla was in the last video. Ghidorah opts for a darker color scheme than the OG, trading the gold for dark gray with lighter accents for his undersides. In his first form, he lacks wings, but his design is amplified tenfold once they regenerate. This is because his wings are a deep red color, which complements his darker skinned body, giving us a monster with a black and red color scheme, which is the most badass combo for anything in the history of ever. Adding to this imposing display is his quadruped stance, supported with his muscular legs, making other Ghidorahs look like they skipped leg day. The bloodshot eyes and spikier heads also make this guy feel as if he just crawled right out of hell, and maybe he did because he did a better job destroying Mars than the Spider Mastermind managed to. Ghidorah also utilizes more traditional fire breath instead of the trademark gravity beams. Given it's a different entity from King Ghidorah and that the fire scene in the film was entirely practical, I can give him a pass because it looks phenomenal. Plus he can still fire red energy based pyroclastic shots, so he's got some variety in his arsenal. This guy is also the ultimate arch-nemesis to Mothra, as he was responsible for wiping out numerous members of her species when descending upon Earth before being sealed away by the Titanic moths. He also swiftly obliterated the Mothra we all know and love when he was reawakened and left her son with childhood trauma. Thankfully, the overpowered Mothra was able to reseal this demonic dragon back single-handedly. Ghidorah is a unique member of the Ghidorah lineage, but a welcome one nonetheless. While Monster X's design wasn't up to Los Pollos Hermanos standards, his final form Kaiser Ghidorah more than makes up for it. After a wicked transformation scene, Godzilla gets to bear witness to the truly horrifying beast that serves as the Zillion's most powerful weapon. Like his cousin Ghidorah, this lad is quadruped, which really helps him dwarf Godzilla in size, and those legs are packing some serious power as just one kick is enough to send the Big G flying halfway across Tokyo. The numerous horns sticking out from atop his head look awesome as always, but the pure red eyes make him look downright sinister like never before. Plus, Kaiser Ghidorah retires the tried and true gravity beams for the superior anti-gravity beams that take a page out of Space Godzilla's book and the fact they're able to lift other monsters and hurl them wherever. Unlike most incarnations, this Ghidorah lacks scales and has golden colored plates over cyan tinted skin. And while I like the color combo, the shape of the plates aren't the best. The warped abstract design just looks a bit gross in some places, especially in the chest region. And moving down to the legs, it's clear this dragon values leg day, doing such a good job that he's grown a whole garden of spikes out from his knees. The Millennium Era has been on a bit of a heater with these design rankings, but stumbled a bit with the Ghidorah, and while Kaiser Ghidorah is epic in his own right, he just can't quite hold a candle to the next handful of designs. If you thought Shin Ghidorah was obscure, then wait until you get a load of this freak. This Ghidorah was featured in Godzilla the Ride Giant Monsters Ultimate Battle. a 4D ride experience that was located in the Sayoben amusement park in Tokorozawa, Saitama, Japan, back in May of 2021. Also, it has a unique Godzilla design that I forgot to talk about in my Godzilla design ranking. But you'll notice it looks pretty familiar. This is -1 Godzilla 2 years before -1 actually came out, and it's surreal seeing this design outside of that film. There are some differences, namely in the head, but it's essentially the same design, which is unsurprising given the attraction's short film was directed by none other than Takashi Yamazaki. But who cares about that stupid lizard? We're here for King Ghidorah, and hot damn does this design kick ass. Funnily enough, he's the first design to have hands, and it's cursed as hell. But he was without those vital limbs for nearly 60 years, so obviously it's going to be an adjustment to get used to their presence. He has a much smaller frame compared to other Ghidorahs, but it's hard to really care when during the ride he's nearly stomping you and the other riders into the pavement, or literally trapping your car inside of his mouth. Thankfully, Rodan saves us from being the Golden Dragon's lunch, but the main issue I have with this iteration, aside from the lack of screen time, is his chest. On its own it's alright, if a little too pronounced, but the way the texture shifts around when he moves looks a little unnatural. Regardless, it's not a deal breaker, and it's cool seeing what could very well be a prototype Ghidorah design for Godzilla -1's inevitable sequel. Hailing from the third rebirth of Mothra film, Cretaceous Ghidorah is the ancient form of a monster that terrorized Earth back in, well, the Cretaceous period. He spent his days killing and absorbing the life forces of dinosaurs, until he got bored and took a meteor out of the planet. This design is pretty controversial in the community because of how drastically different he is from his peers. Starting off, his heads are noticeably larger in proportion to his body, and instead of the pissed off expression the three-headed dragon usually has, this one has a trio of sadistic smiles while it lays waste to the prehistoric planet, and doesn't bat an eye when the time-traveling Mothra Leo makes an attempt to stop him. Down his neck are the spikes introduced back in his debut Heisei incarnation, and they look even better here, especially since they also show up on his tail. He's a duller gold than most Ghidorahs, but this works nicely with his detailed scales that put past designs to shame. I also love the random spike jutting out of both of his knees. It's totally unnecessary, but it goes hard. Also, like Ghidorah, he loses a few points due to not having the gravity beams, which, considering this guy is actually King Ghidorah, he has way less of an excuse. And his fireballs aren't even practical this time. Thankfully, his goofy ass run makes up for it, and while this dragon does get fried up in a volcano by Mothra Leo, he's able to survive through a piece of his tail that was severed. Dude's pulling a starfish out here, except he comes back as something even more ferocious. For what is basically an angsty teen version of Ghidorah, this design is surprisingly phenomenal. When I think of King Ghidorah, this is the design that immediately comes to mind. The massive shining gold wings, the fearsome heads decorated in dazzling displays of lethally sharp horns, and of course, the imposing size that dwarfs even the king of the monsters. Most importantly though, he has huge wings for flying across vast tracts of land. This is the ideal baseline for the character in my opinion, even if literally everything else surrounding this iteration is anything but that. Instead of a horrifying destroyer of worlds from outer space, this Ghidorah was formed when 3 of these cute little creatures named Dorats were exposed to atomic radiation from the Castle Bravo hydrogen bomb, somehow resulting in them fusing into a beastly 3-headed dragon. Listen, I can understand how Heisei Godzilla went from the Godzillasaurus to the atomic breath-firing titan we all know and love through the same means, but the Dorats forming Ghidorah is way more of a stretch. In spite of his bizarre origins, Heisei Ghidorah fixed all the blemishes of Showa's design to create something that made me truly respect the awesomeness of King Ghidorah. Remember how Cretaceous Ghidorah left Earth on a meteor? Well, about 130 million years later, he returned to the planet to wreak havoc, and now he's fully grown up, and holy shit. He looked stylish before, yet this somehow blows his younger self out of the water. This design heavily resembles his design from his first Heisei appearance, but this one tweaks a few aspects to push this one just a little further ahead. His overall build is thicker, and his horns across all portions of his body have been elongated, giving him a more regal look. I also love the fiercer angular shape of the wings, making him feel more vicious, and the curved claws at their folds only amplify that. To make this guy more horrifying, his diet consists entirely of human children, and traps hundreds of kids by teleporting them into a nightmare dome he manifests. Don't know why he can do all that, but I'll chalk it up to space magic. In addition to this character's trademark gravity beam, of which he can now cross the beams together Ghostbuster style, this Ghidorah can fire anti-gravity beams just like Kaiser Ghidorah, although they don't have the same properties as that beast and the beams now come out from his wings. He's also able to hypnotize creatures and uses this ability to control Laura, one of Mothra Leo's fairies, in an attempt to weaken the oversized moth. As if his new scale barrier that was able to block literally any attack Mothra threw at him wasn't enough already. Ghidorah's end goal in the film may be incredibly weird, but you can't deny that this design slaps harder than a wooden spoon on the ass. Plus, it was the first time since the character's introduction back in '64 where he wasn't being controlled by aliens or evil people from the future. Always nice to see the three-headed demon acting on his own accords. The MonsterVerse has never missed with any of their interpretations of the classic Toho kaiju, but King Ghidorah is easily Legendary's greatest triumph. In fact, it's so good that I even got a figure of him. Everything about this design is phenomenal, and it makes Godzilla's most famous rival more terrifying than ever, and makes it believable that he's a destroyer of worlds without going through the whole H.P. Lovecraft route of the anime trilogy. He does quite the number on Earth in the one day he was active in King of the Monsters, laying waste to Washington DC and Boston, while commanding other monsters to devastate the rest of the planet's major cities. Ghidorah's wingspan has varied in size over the years, but this guy definitely has the biggest, and it does wonders for his intimidation factor, spreading them out like a cobra would its hood. This is amplified by the sheer height of this Goliath, who stands at nearly 500 feet tall, the largest depiction of the character besides Void Ghidorah. But hey, at least you see this one's full body and not just their necks. Speaking of which, MonsterVerse Ghidorah has rather lengthy ones that happen to have the most expressive Ghidorah heads ever attached to them. The three heads of Monster Zero have never been very distinct from each other, at least until this film. You can literally see the difference in how each head acts in comparison to one another. Ni, the rightmost head, is the most aggressive, being the first one to go in for a bite on Godzilla in their fight in the Antarctic. The middle head, Ichi, is the leader of the three and keeps the others from being distracted. The leftmost head, San, or as he's better known, Kevin, just kinda does his own thing, like tasting this human-flavored ice cream, at least until Ichi nudges him away. Even his tails are more active than ever before, shaking like those of a rattlesnake in a pale attempt to scare off the Big G. Ability-wise, this Ghidorah takes some pages out of Rebirth of Mothra 3's depiction, being able to fire beams out of his wings. However, MonsterVerse Ghidorah can only do this upon absorbing huge amounts of electricity, and it actually damages himself a little. It doesn't really matter though, since his healing factor is absurdly fast. In fact, he could regenerate his own head, like Kevin did after it was bitten off by Godzilla. MonsterVerse King Ghidorah is an astounding achievement in kaiju design, and I desperately hope this guy makes a reappearance in the future MonsterVerse film, because it's criminal to only have this iteration appear once. Until then, I guess I can just keep watching his alpha call on loop. Fucking metal. And there we go! All in all, I think Ghidorah has remained a consistently well-designed monster throughout all of his incarnations, as Shin is the only one I actively disliked. It's no wonder why he's remained as iconic as he is, and I have little doubt in my mind that future incarnations of the three-headed monster will be any different. If you enjoyed this ranking, be sure to check out my ranking videos on both Godzilla and Mechagodzilla to see how their designs stack up. I'll see you guys in the next one, and have a wonderful day.